Continuing with Gregory Brandt's book, Homeless College Student. This is Chapter 4, Berkeley or Bust. A few days after I introduced the girls to Michael, we packed up his two-door Geostorm with our gear and hit the road. No one could get comfortable or stretch their legs out, but we could have been riding in the trunk and it wouldn't have mattered. It was exhilarating not knowing what was going to happen. I just met these girls a month earlier, and Berkeley, California was 2,500 miles away. An hour after we left, the car started to have its first set of many mechanical problems. Right when we got to Kerrville, Texas, we noticed something wrong with the tire. We had just ate some pot brownies, so we were all dazed and confused, trying to figure out what was going on. Kerrville is a small town where Michael and I were born, but we hadn't been back since we were little kids. We pulled over to a back road on the outskirts of town, and Lisa and Elizabeth sat on top of the car while Michael and I wrestled the tire off. An hour later, a new four-door pickup drove by and the girls waved it down. It was an elderly couple driving around the back roads of the upper Guadalupe River. They were happy to help and offered to take us to the new Kerrville Walmart to fix our flat tire and bent rim. When we got there, everyone spread out in separate directions while the old couple waited for us in their truck. Michael rolled the tire into the auto section, Lisa went in search of a Sailor Moon coloring book, and Elizabeth went to try on new bikinis. I was wandering around nowhere in particular when the lights suddenly went off. The emergencies kicked in a second later, but the normally highly fluorescent Walmart had turned into a dimly lit warehouse. A few of the shoppers acted like it was the most exciting thing that had ever happened in Kerrville. The old couple apologized for their Walmart electrical problems and promised to make it up to us with sandwiches at their house. They said they'd show us the prettiest part of the Guadalupe River. The girls and I decided to go, but Michael stayed with the tire, wanting to be first in line when the power came back on. Their sandwiches sucked, but they took us to a part of the Guadalupe River which none of us had seen before. It had crystal clear water that flowed over the smooth, shallow rocks before going between our toes. It wasn't a busy tourist spot, just a few families wading in the picturesque river on a warm afternoon. I felt proud to be from Kerrville. The car was ready at dusk, and we said goodbye to the old couple. Lisa promised to send them a postcard from the San Francisco Zoo. We squeezed back in Michael's car and got back on I-10 West. A few hours later, it got dark, the radio reception wore off, and everyone got quiet. Michael drove steadily down the access road running parallel to the highway while static came calmly out the speakers. Elizabeth sat up front and stared out the window while Lisa and I made out in the back seat. Michael finally decided to stop the car a few miles east of El Paso. He pulled us down a bumpy side road and up the side of a mountain. The car shook violently and woke everyone up. Then he drove us up a steep incline down a pitch-black trail that he'd never been on before. He finally stopped on what felt like the edge of a cliff. Every few minutes, we'd hear a loud truck that'd shake the car like an earthquake. The next morning, we all woke up at the same time to a purple hummingbird. It flew in through my open window and danced around the inside of the car, giving us each a greeting by gently flickering a few inches from our sleepy faces. You could sleep in your car every night for 1,000 years and never see something like that. Legends say hummingbirds float free of time. They hover around the universe and teach us to savor each person and every moment. It made us feel protected, like God was watching us. We smoked a bowl of strong marijuana. Lisa popped in Blondie's Atomic on cassette tape. Elizabeth made everyone sandwiches, and Michael hit the gas with his mind on making good time. Everyone was chill at first, but when we got to New Mexico, the air conditioning broke, and we all began to smell something horrible. The honeymoon was over, and it was clear just how difficult this trip was going to be. We could have used a motel, but Elizabeth was paying for everything, and the rest of us only had about $50. For the next 1,000 miles, each of us picked a window to hold our head out to avoid one another's stench. Elizabeth refused to get a room, so we continued driving west during the day and being homeless and sleeping in Michael's parked car on the side of the freeway at night. When we finally got to Bakersfield, the car wigged out, so we stopped at a 7-Eleven. Elizabeth said she'd use her credit card to fix it, but Michael had to promise to pay her back. We called a mechanic shop a few blocks from where we were at, and they sent a driver to pick us up. When we got to the shop, the mechanic said he couldn't fix our car till morning. He was a young surfer type who kept hitting on Lisa and Elizabeth. We hung around his shop for a few hours until we got bored and decided to walk aimlessly around Bakersfield. Some wannabe gangsters tried to rob us, and Michael and I almost had to kick their ass. We hurried back to the 7-Eleven gas station to try and figure things out. We stood in front of the store yelling at each other until an elderly black man pulled up in a Cadillac. He got out of his car and immediately calmed us down. Despite being dressed like a pimp, you could tell he was a good guy. He suggested taking us to the homeless shelter he worked at, acting like they'd fix everything. I sat in the back of the 1980s Cadillac with the girls while Michael sat shotgun. Looking out the window, I laughed. I was on my way to a homeless shelter with my twin brother and two rich white girls in a restored classic Cadillac Seville. The shelter's employees treated us like celebrities. We weren't your typical looking homeless people, far from it, and they wanted to make a good impression. People get tired of looking at the same faces every day. That's true everywhere. The staff gave us specific instructions on how their shelter worked. After they explained every little thing, the head of the female homeless people took Lisa and Elizabeth to the women's area, and Michael and I were shown to the men's. Everyone got cleaned up and met in the cafeteria for dinner. The girls were thrilled the food was vegan. The hot meal and warm shower couldn't have come at a better time for our road-weary souls. Nobody enjoys their life when they're sleeping at rest stops and living off PB&J. After dinner, everyone was herded like cattle into an outside courtyard. It would have been okay if it was just Michael and me. We could take care of ourselves. But I felt responsible for Lisa and Elizabeth, too. They acted like carefree kids at summer camp and didn't notice the old men drooling over their half-clad 18-year-old bodies. These weren't the type of girls you take to a homeless shelter, and there are very few realities where either of them would end up at one. They were the type of babes you find on a college campus, not bunking with druggies and felons who just got out of San Quentin and Sing Sing for rape and murder. After dinner, I tried to convince my crew to bail, but nobody wanted to leave after the warm welcome we got. Chapel service was after dinner, but they made sure everyone understood that it wasn't mandatory. Lisa was an agnostic, Elizabeth was rebelling against her Christian parents, and I was too young and stupid to know what the heck I was. Michael went for the sole reason that they had cookies. Most of that night's crowd decided not to go. This upset the Bible thumpers that ran the joint, so everyone that didn't attend service was brought into another fenced area that looked like a prison yard. I felt like I was going to get shanked. I was relieved when I found out they separated men and women at lights out. Men greatly outnumbered women here, just like they do at every homeless shelter, so Lisa, Elizabeth, and the rest of the women were put in a nest at the top of the bleachers in the gym where everyone slept. The next morning, at breakfast, I convinced the girls that a group of convicts were plotting to sneak up the stairs and attack them in the middle of the night. They got freaked out enough where they agreed to come with me to find somewhere else to stay until the car got fixed. We ate a big breakfast, then we set off to find an abandoned camp spot, an empty garage, or a park bench to crash under. After a long walk, we ended up in a quiet park in a nice neighborhood. The girls got frisky, and Elisa started braiding my chest hair. Elizabeth got jealous and ran inside a nearby hospital. We gave her a few minutes before finding her in the cafeteria sobbing over a half-eaten piece of cherry pie. "What do you guys want?" she said, staring sadly down at her plate and pushing a cherry around with her fork. Lisa sat down on the chair next to Elizabeth, put her arm around her and said, "We came for you. We were worried about you." Elizabeth looked up and gave each of us a once-over and then looked at Michael and asked, "Even you, Michael? You were worried too? Were you looking for me?" "Of course he was worried. We were all worried," Lisa answered. "Michael is the one who suggested we live in the cafeteria," I said. Michael had already begun eating the rest of her pie, looked up from the plate, and coldly stated, "I suggested that because I'm hungry." Elizabeth scowled at Michael, so Lisa and I jumped in and said, "He's kidding, he's kidding." "Elizabeth, you're part of this group," she said. I said, "You're part of this group," Lisa said. "Yeah, we wouldn't be here without you," I told her. Elizabeth looked at me with disdain and scowled. "You're just saying that because I'm paying for everything." We hung out in the hospital until it got dark. Elizabeth started to feel better, and before you knew it, we were all laughing and getting along again. It was fun and games until it got dark. Nobody had any better ideas, so I suggested we go back to the park we were at earlier. It was a park like most other parks, a patch of grass surrounded by wealthy homes and a few expensive apartments that qualify as low-income housing. This particular park didn't have any trees. They would have taken up too much space. So the four of us squeezed under a picnic table, lit a joint, and tried to share a blanket. After the joint, it didn't take long for a game of footsie to break out. After footsie, the girls began tickling Michael and me. It was nice until the cops got there. The first thing we saw was their flashlights. Whenever you're surprised by the cops at night, the first thing you always see is the light from their flashlights. Michael and I jumped, and the officers immediately started yelling in typical cop tone. "Get your hands out of your pockets! Hurry up!" Their manner turned when they saw two pretty girls. Why, hello, they said to Lisa and Elizabeth. I stashed our half-burnt joints while the cops drooled over the girls putting on the rest of their clothes. They asked a few questions and we tried to answer honestly, but the last thing these Mayberry deputies wanted to hear was that we'd driven across the country for no particular reason besides the fact that Berkeley sounds cool. What are you guys, some sort of tree huggers? They asked. They ran our names and everyone came back clean. We figured they'd tell us not to sleep in the park and let us go, but instead they told us to stick around and they'd help us get a room. They called their supervisor and he showed up a few minutes later with 2 coupons, one for a free motel room and one for a free pizza. They said it was against policy to drive us there and the city bus wasn't running that late, so they pulled out a map and showed us how to walk there. It was a nice trek taken by 4 happy kids. The room had cable TV, air conditioning, and 2 comfy beds. We ordered a large vegetarian with extra cheese and watched the original Titanic film on Turner Classic Movies while each of us took turns using the phone. The girls called their parents and told them they were okay. Michael and I tried calling Mom, but Guy hung up before she got to the phone. After such a comfortable night, I was surprised how quickly things turned the next day. But with no car and nothing to do, people get upset. We left the room, hit the streets, and within seconds everyone was ripping each other's throats off, yelling and cursing. The mechanic was a common enemy, so I tried to pivot our anger towards him. It's nobody's fault, I told everyone. The car should be fixed. We should be in Berkeley right now. He's right, Elizabeth said. That creep just wants to keep us here. We were naive kids being taken advantage of by a small-town scummy mechanic. The only thing wrong with the car was the serpentine belt, which should have taken about 10 minutes to fix. We didn't know anyone in Bakersfield, and we couldn't leave without a car, so the guy was basically holding us hostage. Elizabeth called him from a payphone and asked what was taking so long. He wanted her to come over to his house so they could talk it over, dinner and a movie, but she wasn't going anywhere without the rest of us. He hesitated for a minute before finally inviting us all to his house. I was surprised the mechanic lived in a nice place, but his parents were probably on vacation. The 4 of us sat on his couch while I told him about staying in a homeless shelter, a public park, and a motel paid for by the local police. You could tell he didn't like Michael or me. Taking these girls to a shelter, he said. You should be ashamed. We wouldn't have had to if our car was fixed, I told him. The mechanic said we could stay the night, but Michael and I had to sleep in the garage while Lisa and Elizabeth were invited to sleep inside, probably in his bedroom. The 5 of us got drunk in the living room before he pushed me and Michael in the garage. There was a strange vibe in the house the next morning while we sat on the couch. The mechanic suggested we all take showers. I'm assuming he wanted to. When I got out, I went back to the living room. Michael had gone outside, and the mechanic was sitting on the couch in the middle of Lisa and Elizabeth. Dude was wearing a tacky pink surfer tank top and had his bristly arms and hairy pits wrapped around my 2 female friends. Lisa scooted away, looked up at me, and said, "Sorry." They acted like I was supposed to be upset. Lisa tried to move down the couch, but the mechanic yanked her arm and pulled her back under his pit. She growled, jumped off the couch, grabbed me and Elizabeth by our wrist, and dragged us to the front yard. We walked over to Michael, who was sitting peacefully Indian-style in the driveway, and sat down next to him, forming a circle. Nobody said anything for a minute until Lisa yelled out, "Fuck Bakersfield!" For the rest of the day, we walked around town waiting for our car. When we got back, it was supposedly fixed, but before the mechanic gave us the keys, he made one last attempt to convince the girls to ditch Michael and me and stay with him at his parents' house. Lisa wanted nothing to do with the tool, but Elizabeth considered it for a second. We finally got on the road heading out of Bakersfield, but only made it about 20 miles before the car started to have the same exact problem that we paid the mechanic to fix. We broke down at a fast food place in a town that reeked like cow shit. As soon as the car stopped moving, a swarm of mosquitoes ditched their shit patties for our young bodies. We were hungry, sunburnt, and sick of Central California. Elizabeth said she'd call the mechanic from a payphone. Lisa, Michael, and I ate French fries while Elizabeth yelled at the mechanic through the phone. It was like she was finally coming out of her mousy shell. I don't know what she told him, but whatever it was, it got the mechanic to send one of his cronies to come fix our car for free. We congratulated Elizabeth on her assertiveness. Her tentative nature had been driving the 3 of us crazy for most of the trip. To see her stand up for something important invigorated our crew. While we waited for the mechanic's goon, I kept my troop in good spirits by writing a story about our adventure on a picnic table near the restaurant. Covering the graffiti that was already there, I described what we'd gone through and everyone signed our names. When the mechanic's friend finally got there, he fixed our car in 30 minutes. We got back on the road and Michael noticed he didn't have power steering. It took him a while to get used to it, but it wouldn't have mattered if the car was on fire. We were getting out of that town. Nobody said much on the drive. Lisa felt cold. She claimed nothing happened between her and the mechanic. We pulled over a few hours later and everyone went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to Michael punching me in the arm because he found out I told Lisa and Elizabeth he pinched their weed. A long-haired country guy appeared out of nowhere and broke up the fight. After everyone caught their breath, the stranger lit a joint and pulled a trained show dog out of the trunk of his Subaru, a collie named Badadia. The guy's name was J.D. He was a 30-year-old country type from deep in the Appalachian Mountains. He had a southern accent and was missing one of his front teeth. This was highly noticeable because all of his other teeth were straight in a normal condition. J.D. had long, silky brown hair, but because of a disease that caused him to lack any other hair on his face or body, that was his only hair. He didn't have any eyebrows or eyelashes, and the guy basically looked like a freak. J.D. had been traveling the country for a couple years with his dog in the worn-down station wagon his grandfather bought him. He worked odd jobs and made money selling drugs. The dog was his only companion and went everywhere he went. After J.D. smoked us out, Michael and I stopped fighting and we got back on the road. Everyone thought this was the last we'd hear from J.D., but later we'd find out that he'd actually been following us for miles, becoming quite infatuated, a stalker at a distance, with our girl Elizabeth. We made it another 20 miles before the car started to overheat, so we pulled over and 10 minutes later J.D. pulled up to save the day. He asked if we wanted to smoke pot, so me, Lisa, and Elizabeth got in his station wagon while Michael worked on the car. I suggested Elizabeth sit up front with J.D. I've become kind of protective of Lisa, and I considered the possibility of J.D. and Elizabeth hooking up, figuring she'd finally have some company and Lisa and I could be alone. J.D. wouldn't have been Elizabeth's first choice, or her second or third, but the girl needed someone. She wouldn't have even spoken to J.D. if they were strangers in the same town, but they met on a road trip where anything's possible. When you're on a road trip, you're bombarded with things you've never seen and won't see again. Road trips teach you to enjoy the little things you normally wouldn't, like J.D. J.D. used this smoking session to make his move. It was obvious I was with Lisa, and Michael and Elizabeth were clearly not together, so J.D. got a chance to break out a bottle of Appalachian Charm, showering Elizabeth with compliments. "You're the prettiest girl west of the Mississippi," he told her. "One day I'm going to buy you a double-wide trailer and paint it pink because of your womanhood." J.D. was on his way to Berkeley and said he wouldn't be hard to find. He'd be at the Mediterranean Cafe every day. The Med is a well-known coffee shop off Telegraph Avenue popular with poets and writers. Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg used to frequent there. Later that evening, everyone's eyes got wide when we approached San Francisco. The traffic got heavier, lights scattered the hillside, and we started to pick up strange hipster radio stations. Everyone had butterflies in their stomachs, but our nervousness turned to chaos when Michael drove right through San Francisco over the bridge and mistakenly ended up in a bad neighborhood in Oakland. Instead of just admitting he made a wrong turn, he went berserk and showed us just how crazy he could be. We begged him to pull over so we could ask directions, but instead he cackled until he started losing his voice, drove on the wrong side of the road, and punched himself in the face until his nose spewed blood. If Michael doesn't get his coffee and cigarettes, he acts like his birthright has been stolen. He's a vigilante on a mission to destroy the wrongdoers who prevented him from enjoying his vices. We were screaming at him to pull over while he sped 30 miles over the speed limit, barreling through red lights like Gene Hackman in The French Connection. The car finally screeched to a halt at a check cashing store on a shady corner where Michael yelled for us to "Get out!" He parked sideways and inadvertently had the windshield wipers going. A group of frayed men looking for a handout or reason to kill crept up to our little two-door car in the intimidating East Oakland night. Everyone yelled, "Drive, Michael, drive, let's get out of here. You said you wanted out, so get out," he barked. One of the men gave Lisa the universal sign to roll down her window, and she vigorously shook her head no. Her dreadlocks wagging back and forth reminded me of Rolf the dog, and I inappropriately began laughing. Everyone stopped what they were doing, even Michael and the killer bums, and looked at me. Then one guy started tapping on the glass, and Lisa let out a high-pitched scream. It sent the guy running, and Michael finally sped out of the parking lot to the road. Someone threw him a cigarette, and he calmed down long enough to pull over and ask directions. A gas station worker showed us how to get to UC, and 5 minutes later, Michael found a parking spot on a side street of Telegraph Avenue to sleep off his bad mood. The rest of us went walking around the neighborhood we'd driven across the country to see. It was late and we were tired, but we made it to Berkeley. Telegraph Avenue is full of interesting characters at all hours, and it was the middle of the night, but we immediately knew it was worth the drive. The second we got out of the car, we saw a guy riding a bike with a cat on his shoulder, a man in a flowery dress yelling hateful things, and an elderly woman with pigtails on roller skates. The first person we spoke to was a girl wearing a University of Texas baseball cap. We told her we were from Texas, and I said I went to UT. Lisa and Elizabeth laughed and told her I was lying. She smiled and said she was a film student who was in Berkeley for the summer. She asked where we were staying, and I told her we were homeless vagabonds. Perfect, she said. Berkeley's the homeless capital of America. After late-night cappuccinos, we walked back to the car where we found Michael peacefully asleep. The rest of us got in the tiny Geo and tried to sleep too, but we were too anxious and tossed and turned. The next morning, we were all grumpy, smelly, and sleep-deprived. I followed Lisa and Elizabeth to a laundromat Michael had parked by. Elizabeth and I got in a minor argument over the amount of laundry detergent to use, but the second Michael woke up, things exploded. Elizabeth wouldn't give him a cigarette, and Michael went off verbally, calling her every name in the book. It was like a pit bull tearing up a rabbit. He brought her to tears, and Lisa comforted her. "I won't go another mile with this psycho," Elizabeth screamed. Lisa wanted to ditch Michael too, and she said I had 2 minutes to decide whether I was going to go with them or my brother. If I let the girls go by themselves, I wouldn't ever see them again, but if I left Michael alone in a strange city with no money, he'd be screwed. I found myself running back and forth across the street from Michael's car to the bus stop where Lisa and Elizabeth had set up at. I was trying to play peacemaker. I felt if we could talk this out, and we could stick together. My goal was to keep the group intact. I brought us together, and I didn't want us to split up. "I'm not staying," Michael yelled. "I'm going back to Texas." I explained to him that he couldn't drive 2,500 miles with no gas. I was getting some cash wired soon, so I told him if he could be patient and wait a few days, then I'd have $50 to help him get started. "Let them cool off and meet us at the Med in 2 hours," I told him. Then the girls jumped on a city bus, its doors shut, and I went running after it down the sidewalk. "You better be there," I yelled to Michael as I ran up to the bus. There was traffic, and I was in good shape, so I kept up behind the bus for the next 10 blocks. The driver finally stopped, and Lisa and Elizabeth got off laughing. They'd been watching me run after them from the back bus window. I was out of breath, but proved my loyalty. We got to the Med Cafe and found JD high on acid. He was surprised to see us, despite the fact that he told us to meet him there. The girls whined about Michael, but JD calmed them down by speaking in parables. He had a gentle way to him, like he had flakes of hillbilly zen falling from his shoulders. His dilated eyeballs made him look unworldly. "A box of rain will ease your pain, and love will see you through," he said, quoting the Grateful Dead. "I'm going to show you all the most beautiful things in the Bay." "I'd rather see New York," I told him, being an asshole. Lisa and Elizabeth were carrying their huge bags, and we had a couple hours to kill before Michael met us at the coffee shop, so JD invited us to a University of California frat house where his Appalachian cousin had been renting a room for the summer. I had a panic attack seconds after we got there. The ground felt like it was getting crooked beneath me, and an earthquake seemed imminent. I was worried about Michael. I left him alone without a dollar or friend and knew I had to save him before the big one hit. Click the thumbs up and subscribe button. The frat houses was packed with Berkeley hipsters, artists, and homeless types. There were drugs everywhere. We only smoked weed, and they were happy to offer. The second we got there, people started passing us pipes, joints, and edibles. It's surprising and a little unsettling just how many doors two pretty girls can open. Marijuana increases feelings of paranoia, and I was on unfamiliar land without a dollar to my name. My twin brother was somewhere lost in the crowd, and the 2 girls I was with could ditch me in a second for someone with a couch, a car, or even a plate of food. After we got high in the general areas, JD took us upstairs to meet his Appalachian cousin. She got out of the shower and took her time covering up like an exhibitionist. She was a tall blonde you might consider attractive in an Appalachian mountain kind of way. JD and his cousin were apparently very close because I'd never seen 2 relatives so physically affectionate with one another. I sat on the floor while JD, Lisa, and Elizabeth sat on the bed. JD's cousin started small talk while she put on her clothes and dried her hair. "So you guys are from Texas," she asked. "Just got here? Never been to the city?" Now I felt insulted. Who did this girl think she was, assuming we've never been to a city? "No, we might be from Texas," I said. but we've been to cities before. Excuse me, she said. When we say city here, we mean San Francisco. I always seem to accidentally insult slow-minded people. The girls glared at me, but I was losing it. My panic attack worsened when JD put his arm around Elizabeth and Lisa started sensually bouncing on the fraternity bed. I jumped off the floor and demanded we go find Michael. JD took us back to the coffee shop and Michael showed up 20 minutes later. I asked JD if he'd leave us alone so we could talk. He agreed, and we ordered 4 cappuccinos. Everyone was getting along. We've been through hell together, I told my group. It's been a journey for all of us, and we've all become better people together. I looked at each person individually and took everything I learned from motivational scenes and films to pull off a convincing performance. Now, I know we don't always see eye to eye or even get along, really, I said, but we came thousands of miles all the way from little old San Antonio, Texas, and we're the only ones in this entire coffee shop that did. Nobody could have done what we did, at least not in the way we did. We're the only ones who came from Texas, no one else. I was just stating the obvious, but I said it in a sincere tone that made us feel special, like we accomplished something. I could have been reading the inspirational scene from Independence Day and it wouldn't have mattered. The group was back together, and I even got Michael to apologize to Lisa and Elizabeth. He told them he didn't have any hard feelings, but he wanted to get back to Texas for a girl he was missing. Right. Michael agreed to stay a few days until I got money wired, and JD promised to take us sightseeing all around the bay. He invited us to stay at the UC fraternity house his cousin was staying at, but he said only Lisa and Elizabeth could sleep inside. Michael and I could stay, but we had to sleep on the frat house's back porch and stay out of sight. The next day, JD showed us around. He was a remarkable tour guide and showed us famous Berkeley landmarks like Moe's Books, People's Park, and the University of California. Later that week, he drove us to San Francisco where we saw the Golden Gate Bridge, Peace Park, and Haight-Ashbury. He didn't just take us to famous landmarks, but he also showed us the cheapest places to eat, where to use public restrooms, and places we could park our car. About a week after we got there, I finally got money wired from Texas. Elizabeth claimed I was lying about it the whole trip and was speechless when it arrived. It was only about $250, but it was enough to give Michael $50 and still have some money left for Lisa and me. As soon as Michael left, JD tried to get Elizabeth alone every chance he got. Lisa and I'd hang around Telegraph Avenue while they drive off different places in his car. Lisa and I loved the scene on Telegraph. We made friends with street people, and when we weren't with them, we'd be at the free vegan meals. Someone gave us a flyer with directions to every free plate in Berkeley. Our favorite was Food Not Bombs in People's Park. They've been piling fixings on the plates there for decades. If you want to see the diverse face of homelessness, there's nowhere better than People's Park. We'd see Elizabeth and JD sparingly, but most of the time he tried to get her alone. Sometimes she'd come back looking really freaked out. She told Lisa she was scared of him and wanted to see her family. A few days later, she told JD she was going back to Texas. He offered to drive her, but she insisted on taking a plane and was there the next day. It was best Elizabeth went home. The girl had enough adventure to last her a lifetime. I wanted to stay in Berkeley permanently, but after Elizabeth left, I knew Lisa would want to go home next. The only way I could convince her to stay was if I had money, so I needed a job. The next day I started working for a telemarketing office selling California newspaper subscriptions. I worked there for a couple weeks. Lisa would walk to work with me and wait outside the office building with JD's dog. I thought things were going good and she was going to stay in Berkeley with me, but then JD started talking about driving to Texas. He asked if we wanted to come. I didn't want to leave, but Lisa cried and said she missed her cat. She begged me to go back with her. I'll break up with Javier the second we get back, and then you can move in. Will he be okay with this, I asked. He doesn't have a choice, she said. I call the shots. For our last night in Berkeley, JD got me and Lisa 2 hits of LSD and left us alone in the hills. Lisa and I shared a sleeping bag and a profound acid trip which put things in perspective. We had no clue what our mission was about until the LSD hit and things became clear. We spent the rest of the night laughing hysterically to the thought of driving across the country for no particular reason. The absurdity of it we hadn't even noticed until that moment. The next day we packed up JD's wagon with his dog and our gear. Before we left, I pulled him aside and whispered, Lisa really wants to go back to Texas, but I'm not going to let her ride back alone with you. He wouldn't look me in the eye while I stated my stipulations. Now we're going to sit in the back and you're going to sit up front and drive, I said. I want you to go the straightest way possible, even only stopping for gas. and keep the radio on at all times, even if it's static. Sure thing, partner, whatever you say. JD was mature and dignified. We had an uneventful drive on I-10 East when we finally ran out of gas at the Welcome to Kerrville sign. Out of money, we were going to have to panhandle. JD wanted either me or Lisa to go with him and walk to the gas station, but I was being a jerk. I'm not letting Lisa walk down the freeway with you, and I can't go because I'm not going to leave her alone in the car. Shucks, Greg, God can take care of her, he said. You can trust me. Sorry, not happening. All right, if that's the way you want it, he said, civilly. JD grabbed the gas can, apologized to Lisa, and strolled down the highway with nothing but a smile and positive attitude. Hurry up, I coldly shouted before he left. As soon as he was out of sight, Lisa told me I was being an asshole. She said I had no reason to distrust JD. We bickered like an old couple for an hour before JD got back, chilling us out as usual. Texas is great. Everyone's so kind and welcoming, he said. Don't trust anyone, I told him. He had a can full of gas, but it wasn't enough to get to San Antonio. So we drove to the next McDonald's and sat in their parking lot for an hour. Lisa and I asked people for cigarettes while JD used the payphone to call Elizabeth. Someone struck up a conversation with an elderly couple, one of which was a retired college professor, and Lisa told them about her plans to go to UT and study botany. I have a 4.0 GPA so far at community college, she bragged. I'd like to go to UT too, I said, trying to join the conversation. We didn't ask them for any money, but we told them our story and they gave us $20. We ordered a pound of French fries, filled the car with gas, and got back on I-10 East to San Antonio. An hour away, I began seeing familiar landmarks and road signs, but I started getting nervous when I realized I didn't have anywhere to go. Lisa and I were planning to live together, but I had to give her a few days to break the news to Javier. Lisa and JD were looking at me for instructions, but the only place I could think of going was Janet and Jonathan's house. Neither was happy to see us. We caught them off guard. They only met Lisa once and had never even heard of JD. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just wanted to tell someone what I'd gone through. I tried to take the edge off with a lighthearted story, but it didn't help, and they asked us to leave. Lisa told JD to take her to her parents' house, and for the first time in over a month, we were going to be apart. I don't want to be homeless without you, I told her. We don't have to be homeless ever, she said. Javier will move out in a few days, and you can move in. I had time to kill, and I knew how to sleep outside, but I didn't really feel like visiting the same arcades, libraries, and haunts I'd gone to years before. I wanted to chill somewhere new and unfamiliar, like Berkeley. The closest thing I could find was the area north of downtown off Broadway. I spent the next week loitering around central San Antonio, waiting for Javier to move out. I basically lived out of the downtown library. I walked up and down the Riverwalk a few times a day. I slept in stairwells and took naps in Brackenridge Park. I was dirty, tired, and beat, but I had a great attitude, looking forward to the life I had planned with my new girlfriend. A few days later, I moved in and became Lisa's official boyfriend. Javier left most of his stuff and I started wearing his clothes. Lisa didn't mind my new wardrobe, but she got really upset when I carved my initials into a piece of furniture his grandfather had made. Lisa and Javier were still friends, and they spent a good portion of their day together with identical classes at community college. If I was really as crazy about her as I said I was, I probably would have been a little jealous. She was spending more time with him than me. For a few weeks, I stayed home while Lisa went to school. I didn't do much besides smoke pot and watch her VHS movie collection. One day, she came home complaining that I needed a job, so I got my old gig at the telemarketing office back in a new second job working at a haunted house on Grayson Street. I spent all my time working and didn't give Lisa as much attention as I should. I was new to relationships and didn't really know how to act. Javier gave her the attention she needed, and one day she came home from school and said she wanted to break up with me. I put my arms around her and kissed her neck. No, don't do this, I said. I'll change and you'll see an affectionate side to me. It's too late, she said. You missed out. Give me another chance, I pleaded. You just want the apartment, she said, and you can keep it. Honestly, I was relieved. Lisa and I only had a good romance when there was the adventure of the road and the western skies as a backdrop for our movie. We were better friends. The outside stimulation and thrill of the road is what made us more. A month later, it was like the trip never happened. The 4 kids who set off to California were doing the exact same thing that they were before they left. Lisa was back with Javier, Michael was living at Janet and Jonathan's, and Elizabeth had just gotten back from a traumatic experience in North Carolina with JD and his backcountry relatives. I stayed friends with Lisa. She wanted back rent for the time we lived together, so I helped her deliver the newspaper every day until I paid it off. Some of the best conversations we had happened during that early morning route, driving around in her blue 2-door Geo Metro hatchback. After I paid her what I owed, I continued helping for free. That was chapter 4 of the great book, Homeless College Student, written by Gregory Brandt. It's such an easy read. If you're not used to reading books, this would be a great book if you have a book report or anything else. It's available for free on Kindle right now, Homeless College Student, and you can also find it under Gonzo Education as well. And like I said, it's a really great book. And if you watch this whole video, don't forget to click the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, and write your comments down below. Tell me what you thought of that. That was chapter 4 of Homeless College Student. Thanks again.